Now, government seems to be leaning more on the private sector than ever before. There have been moves to invite private businesses into very vital sectors. Deputy President Paul Mashatile has asked corporates and corporations to help fix the water as well as the power crisis that we are experiencing in the country. And the Transport Department has asked Business Unity South Africa to set up a private sector participation office. So let's discuss this with Khulekani Mathe from Business Unity South Africa. So good to have you with us this morning. Welcome. So a really warm hand, a very generous hand that government has extended out to business, saying we want to make this work and we need you. What is your reaction to that?
Well, good morning, Thami, and good morning to the viewers of eNCA. We certainly welcome the invitation by government to work with us as the private sector. Combined as a country, we have the resources, we have the skills, we have the capabilities to fix the problems that are facing the country. So it's a no-brainer that we should actually pool those resources together and try and fix the problem. That we haven't done it earlier is really regrettable, but we now have an opportunity to work together and fix things.
I actually want to backtrack a little bit, because for decades this has been the call and the cry of the private sector, wanting to be included in government, and also even calling for the privatization of some of the state assets and privatization of some sectors. That has been government's, rather the private sector's voice. Why is it that government has not heeded your initial invitation? Why only now? What prevented that relationship from forming beforehand?
Well, I mean, it's understandable that there would be that kind of reluctance, because the earlier versions of privatizations in other countries did not produce the results that were expected. And so governments, and in many instances unions, also pushed back against the idea of privatization. But I think we are a long way away from those sort of early versions of privatizations in various countries of the 70s and the late 80s. We now have models that can work, where private sector and the public sector can work together and really fix the problems, get utilities to run, build infrastructure, make sure that the economy works.
Talk us through the innate differences between privatization version 101 and privatization 2.0, which is where we are at now.
I guess I put my mouth into my foot into it.
You certainly
did.
But
I think the important thing here is that we currently have a partnership with government. We've identified, and I'm going to use that as an example, we've identified 3 areas that we're going to work together. Energy is one of them. And so you were talking earlier about how many days we've gone without load shedding. And so that's evidence of some things beginning to work. The other area that we have chosen is transport and logistics. Well, I mean, judging by what we're seeing, and we certainly have released a report some 3 weeks ago where we were reporting back to the country on the progress that we've made as partners, working with government, working with state-owned companies in various areas. And in that report, we show areas where we've made progress, and certainly one of them is around energy, where the intensity of load shedding has certainly declined. If you compare this time last year, we were experiencing blackouts for longer hours, many times a week. We've just gone for 13 days, as you said, without load shedding. So things are beginning to work, and this is thanks to us agreeing to work together as a country and use all of our resources rather than go it alone.
Not too long ago, we heard the Minister of Finance saying that new energy projects are underway, and that those new energy projects are going to be leading to the turnaround in South Africa's fortunes as far as load shedding is concerned. Are we starting to see those new energy projects actually bearing fruit? And South Africans, I think at this point, some of them are a bit skeptical, as in what is really behind the 13 days of no load shedding. Is it really because there are structural differences and structural changes that have been made, which will then be sustainable, or is this just a temporary patch because of the season that we are in?
So let's allow Minister Ramakgopa to answer those questions when he gives his briefing on the state of the implementation of the Energy Action Plan. But I've just showed you the comparisons between last year, so the same period last year, which begins to indicate that there is some difference between these two periods, and certainly something is beginning to work in that regard.
So that's the one area that
Yes.
Private sector and government have decided to work, electricity.
Yeah.
You were going on to name two more.
Yes, and just to also come to the point that you raised about the statement that was made by the Minister of Finance about this private investment. This is not a new program, by the way. Our Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program is as old as 2011. So since 2011, you started to have the private sector building independent power production units, which are now beginning to feed into our national grid. But more importantly, I think what the minister is referring to is the decision that was taken by Cabinet and announced by the President to really lift the limit on what independent companies could produce for their own use as well as for to sell on to the grid. When that decision was taken, it really freed up the private sector. You suddenly saw something close to 6 megawatts worth of power production projects being initiated, an investment of that scale. So it shows you that when we take the right decisions, we can actually begin to improve the situation. So moving right along, I was talking about the next area where we have agreed to partner with government, and that is in the area of transport and logistics. So we all know the challenges in our ports, the challenges with our rail system, the impact that is having on various sectors of the economy. Last year, the fruit and citrus producers were complaining that they can't get product to market, etc. The miners were also complaining and even indicating that they're likely to shed jobs as a result of that. And so we've begun to work together, again in the same way that we started working together under the initiative initiated by the President called the NLCC, the National Logistics Crisis Committee, where the private sector comes into the party, state-owned entities and government look at the problem. So, for instance, in the transport and logistics space, we've got a number of rail corridors that serve different purposes. We've got teams looking at each of those corridors every day and looking at what needs to be done to fix the problem. And there again, it's early days, started almost a year later compared to the energy space, but even so, we're beginning to see some improvements there. So the philosophy of working together as opposed to the kind of outright sale of state assets, which would be your privatization 101, is what is different because we are closer to each other, we meet more regularly. So we report to the President. These teams that are doing this work report into the President every 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. That means that there's an opportunity to sit down with the highest decision makers and say, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to change? What are the blockages that we need to unblock? And that's bearing fruit.
There are some critics of the Transnet recovery plan who are saying that the current plan doesn't address the structural challenges that Transnet is facing. What is your view on that?
What we are comforted by is that there has been a process, a much longer process, which is run by the office in the presidency, which is called Operation Vulindlela, where officials from the presidency and National Treasury actually undertook a process of implementing reforms. Firstly, identifying the reforms that we need to make, and then putting in place measures to implement those reforms. Coming out of that was a document called the Freight Logistics Roadmap. This is a roadmap of how we are going to implement the changes that are necessary in our transport system, in our rail system, in our port system. And so that is essentially guiding what needs to be done, it opens up opportunities for the private sector to play a role in each of these spaces. So we are comforted by the fact that government is seeing the light in terms of really drawing everybody who has something to contribute into making a contribution.
So energy is the one area of key participation. You've spoken about, transport and logistics. There were three that you wanted to highlight. What is
so the other area that we identified and agreed to work in partnership is crime and corruption. Again, the impact of crime in our country is massive. The impact on people and their ability to do everyday things that they have to do, to be able to go to work, to be able to knock off late at work and get home without fearing being harmed by a crime, right down to the sort of economic crimes that we're seeing, whether we're talking about the construction mafias, the illegal mining and everything else in between, the sort of grand-scale corruption that we saw during the times of state capture, which we need to fight. So all of those are elements of crime and corruption that we really need to get to root out of the system, because they really have a debilitating effect on the economy and on our efforts of rebuilding our country.
Do you feel like there is a greater weight upon business? Should all of the areas that you've highlighted, should government not have the capacity in and of itself to be able to execute, to be able to run a country, to be able to put policy in place that will lead to increased growth, economic growth, stability, social stability, economic stability, without necessarily being so dependent on the private sector? Because on its own, we see where we are, and thus, therefore, the need to bring in the private sector. What are your comments on that? I mean, and the reflection that it potentially has on government and its seeming inability to, quote unquote, handle its business on its own without business?
So if we took a view that we will fold our arms and say, government, it's your job to fix water, to fix transport and logistics, chances are that it would take a bit longer to really get out of this. The fact of the matter is that we are in bad shape as a country, as an economy, growing as we did last year at 0.6%, right? So if we do nothing, things are going to get worse. Here we have an opportunity to say we are where we are. It is an undesirable situation, but we can get out of it if we work together and pool our resources, our skills, our capacity to really lift ourselves out of this. And that is the view that we have taken. Lamenting is not going to help us. What is going to help us is to get in and get our hands dirty.
I'm just looking at the numbers. You mentioned that 0.6%, which was the real GDP. It was revised down from 0.8%. The prospects now and the projections are a 1.6% projected growth rate over the next 3 years. Now, that's quite a big jump from the 0.6 where we are to the 1.6 projected over the next 3 years. Is this actually an attainable goal, or would we once again find ourselves having to revise these projections down?
There's no telling what's going to happen. I mean, these are projections, as you say. The Reserve Bank is projecting that for this year we're likely to grow at 1.2%. That's not a big jump. But we would like much higher levels of growth. We would like growth in the order of 3% and upwards, which just help us stem the decline. In other words, make sure that we don't lose more jobs in the economy, and then start to build the capacity to employ more people, to produce more, so that we can improve the lives of people in South Africa. So the 1.6, you call it a big jump, it would still not get us out of trouble, in the sense that the population is growing at a much higher rate than that. So in effect, if we stay at these levels of growth, we are getting poorer as a nation. We need much higher levels of growth so that we can at least get wealthier and start to meaningfully address the problems that we all face. Because at these rates, we might be responding to crises in one area, basically shifting resources around because there is not enough. But when we attain higher levels of growth, suddenly we are able to generate the resources that the government needs to be able to fix education, to fix health, to fix water, etc. So we really are working with government because we believe that if we do that, we will be able to grow the economy and start to turn the situation around.
The 1.6 projected over the next three years, you're saying it's definitely not enough. It's survival. We're not even surviving. We're still bleeding jobs. You mentioned the ideal 3%, the global growth rate projected is 3.1%. So that would literally just put us with the global prospects. But how is South Africa faring as far as foreign direct investment? What is the appetite globally for investment in the country? I mean, understanding that there are also socio-political aspects that also feed into this.
So, I mean, there are different views that one can take of that question. On the one hand, you know that the presidency is leading an investment drive. As a target has been set, well, the target that was set previously was achieved. A new target has been set, so you have a team of people going out globally to really talk to investors and explain the investment opportunity in South Africa. So that is happening, and it must happen because in order to drive growth, you need investment, right? But we must also make ourselves look good to the investor, make ourselves look attractive to the investment community out there. And part of that is the very things that we're speaking about, because if you are going to invest in this economy, you want to be at least sure that the infrastructure works. Otherwise, you're going to produce here and not be able to move the goods around. Or your production might be constrained because, there is no water to support that production. So what we're doing feeds into this idea of making ourselves an attractive investment destination. And then more investment will come, and that investment will also help us attain the kind of levels of growth that I said we need in order to be able to start to improve the situation in the country.
Perhaps let's personalize this conversation just for the next few minutes while we have you here. Lower inflation, that is what we are all ascribing for. That will help people be able to take out more credit. It improves affordability, household expenditure increasing. What would you propose as the panacea for inflation control?
I don't think there is any panacea at all. And I'm no expert on issues of inflation. I do know that high levels of inflation are really bad for the economy because they reduce the purchasing power of the money that people have in their hands. And unfortunately, the poor tend to bear the brunt of higher levels of inflation. So every effort has to be made to keep inflation under control. Now, some of our inflation is not driven by internal or domestic factors. Some of it is driven by external factors. So the value of the rand and the price of petrol, etc., or let me say oil, drive our inflation to a large extent. So yes, there is something that can be done domestically, but then you also have to deal with these external factors driving inflation, which makes it really difficult. I do not envy the job of the Reserve Bank because it is difficult.
As I let you go, Mr. Mathe, because you're in government, as you say, are now smoking the peace pipe and are sitting at the same table, discussions of interference by government in state-owned enterprises where obviously private individuals and CEOs, private sector has been put in place. Have you actually discussed that? Has that been an area of concern for you as business? I know it has, because many of those in your fraternity have spoken quite eloquently about that too. Have you actually spoken with government about interference or maybe non-interference from government side?
Well, what we know as the private sector is what makes organizations function and function very well. And that is if all the different role players play their roles effectively. When the boards who are tasked and charged with the overall governance of the company take the right decisions, the correct decision in employing people with the right skills, etc., we know that the company will flourish. When you start to meddle with that, then there will be problems down the line. So we share our experiences with government of what we know to work, right, in some of the businesses that are that are represented. So that's what we advocate for. We're not in these enterprises to know whether somebody picks up a call and shouts instructions down, but we know that if you want an organization to run, let the boards provide the necessary governance, let the boards hire the people with skills, and let the executives run those companies and those entities, and you will see the results.
Mr. Khulekani Mathe, we thank you so much for your time this morning, as well as your insight, relationships between business and the public sector. That's Mr. Khulekani Mathe, CEO designate of Business Unity South Africa. Now, we've been talking about it, we've mentioned it, electricity. It is our viewers' question today, and we did ask you,